I'm Susan Cotton, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about John Milton today. As Dr. Barr said, some of you may not be aware of who he is. He's a British poet, a British scholar, very well known for many, many things that he did. He looks kind of sad. He's best known for Paradise Lost, and he doesn't exactly look like a really happy man, does he? I want to try to put him in context for you a little bit so you'll understand what was going on in the world when he was writing, why we read him, and then just some very general things about Paradise Lost, because there's hardly time to cover anything in depth in just a few minutes. Milton was born in 1608, so he was 12 when the Mayflower Pilgrims came to America. And like the Mayflower Pilgrims, Milton was a Puritan, but he was a moderate rather than an extremist like those who came to America. You probably know, historians, that Charles I was beheaded when he upset Parliament, and regicide was not a happy thing, and Milton set about to address this notion of regicide, the people taking the law into their own hands. This is the way people communicated. There were no cell phones, there were no, texting and all this kind of things, and scholars, historians, other people wrote really long treatises. They had a really complicated formal format that you wrote in. So if you've had Comp 1 and you think that was complicated, yeah, have a nice day. Okay, so anyway, in response to this action, Milton wrote a work called The Tenure of Kings and Magistrates. And essentially what this says is that there exists between ruler and ruled a relationship, and he actually uses, you want to click the term contract, and I have some things side by side here. Milton says all men naturally were born free, and Locke says men being by nature all free, etc. A lot of the language in Locke is very similar to the language in Milton, only Milton was 50 years before. And you may also recognize some of the language that occurs in our own Declaration of Independence. One of the reasons, again, to look at Milton. Milton also wrote Areopagitica, named after the Greek Areopagus, which was a court. He wrote it in response to the Licensing Act of 1642. It was a censorship act. And in it, he brings forth a lot of his ideas which show up again in Paradise Lost. One of the notions in Areopagitica is that I cannot praise a fugitive and cloistered virtue that never sallies out and sees the light of day. Milton had the idea in his head that Adam and Eve in paradise were enjoying a kind of cloistered virtue, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. To put this in another way, let's suppose, I'll just pick Dean Whitley. Suppose she gets on her sailboat and she goes, she's having a lovely time, and she's stranded on a desert island, right? While she is there, by herself, she steals from no one, she covets no one's anything, and commit any of these sins. So Milton asks, if she does not have the opportunity to sin, is she then virtuous, not being tested, that kind of thing, okay? So Milton thought that if people couldn't choose what they wanted to read and decide for themselves, then they couldn't learn and they could not become virtuous by virtue of having to make those choices. Okay, perhaps virtuous is not the right word to use. There we go. Another kind of modern idea that Milton brought up was the notion that, people ought to be able to get a divorce. He was not a happily married man, and these are some quotes from his work. But he thought, if two people marry, remember we're in the 1600s, people didn't live together and know each other and all that. Two people who get married for all the right reasons, with every intention of staying together for life, discover after they're married that they cannot be in the same room together without just driving each other crazy. Why should they be chained together for the rest of their natural lives? We understand this, right? But a few years before that, Henry VIII didn't understand that, and look what happened to him, right? Excommunicated an entire country. Okay. In the 1500s, Copernicus brought forth a new cosmology, as you all know. He overturned the notions of Ptolemy, right? And then the earth was no longer the center of the universe. And the Renaissance notion of the great chain of being was very important during Milton's time. You've all heard things like angels and archangels and cherubim and seraphim. That's a pecking order of angels, okay? So the way the world saw things, I think of it as chicken snuff sock, like a food chain. So in the Renaissance cosmology, organization of the universe, the creator was at the top, and then all the different levels of angels, and then man. So if the earth is the center of the universe, and man is the highest thing beneath the creator and the angels, he's pretty important, right? This is the same kind of notion where we get the notion of the lion is the king of beasts. It comes from the great chain of being. The mighty oak is the greatest of all the plants and trees. Well, Donne talks about this. He says, a new philosophy calls all in doubt the element of fire is all put out. The man's head just like this. He couldn't figure out, his place in the universe anymore. And if you will, I'm sure at some point you've all seen the films, the MIB films, where you have a whole galaxy in a marble around a cat's neck and on a collar, or at the end, big green creatures, playing marbles with galaxies. The way they felt at the time is how we would feel probably if we found out that was true about our universe and our place in our universe. It just shook everyone up very much. Milton also shows up in modern literature. One of my favorite parodies, Housman's Terence, this is stupid stuff, says, Malt does more than Milton can to justify God's ways to man. And of course, you all know what he means by malt, right? The frontispiece quotation and the title of Pullman's The Golden Compass also come from Paradise Lost, so it keeps creeping into our thing. This is Milton's cosmology, his organization of the universe that he created for this. And when Paradise Lost was published, theologians and just people in general during his time were just outdone. They said, that's not theology, and Milton wrote an entire work, De Doctrina Christiana, of Christian doctrine, to talk about the theology behind Paradise Lost. He refers to this pendant earth in Paradise Lost, and in Milton, there's a little thing that hangs out in a chain, and the earth actually hangs like a wrecking ball, off the side of the thing. And the creation of man is what Milton calls this great experiment. After the fall of the third of heaven, with behind Satan of the angels, then according to Milton, the creator created an experimental person, to see if this one would work better than the previous one did. Okay, so Paradise Lost. When I was an undergraduate, and even when I was doing my master's work, I had an irrational fear of Milton or studying Milton. I wouldn't take a class from anyone who taught Milton, much less actually take a course. So I got into a PhD program. I thought, you're going to get a PhD in English, probably English literature. Maybe you're going to have to read Milton. So I started with it, right? I was hooked. I was stuck. Milton originally wrote Paradise Lost in 10 books. Then he changed it to 12 because that's the epic number. And it's written in blank verse, which was something else that wasn't real popular during the time. But some of the concepts that I'd like to share with you, things that Milton does a little differently, maybe lure you in, include the beginning of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree. It's a periodic sentence and ends up sing heavenly muse. Notice there's a conjunction in there. And a lot of people read Paradise Lost and they want to think of the fall of man as the first disobedience. But I'm going to suggest to you, and those of you who'll disagree with me, go read it again and then come argue with me. I'd love to have the conversation. Consider these two acts. And the reason I suggest that, and of course fruit here is a double entendre. We have the apple, right, and Eve eats the apple. And we have the notion of the fruit as the proceeds or results of the action, right? When the Creator creates Adam in Paradise Lost, and he puts him to work, gives him dominion over the animals, they're having a conversation, And Adam's going, you know, 2 of these, okay, lions, tigers, bears, oh my, you know. And he goes, wait a minute, he goes, where's mine? And the Creator says, well, you know, Adam, I created you in my own image, and I just thought you'd want to be more like me, you know, spiritual, non-physical. Adam's going, no, that's okay, where's mine? So, you know, according to Milton, it's Adam's own fault. Milton says, Adam was created sufficient to have stood. But at the fall of man, when Eve succumbs to the subtleties of the serpent, Adam is not Adam as created, right? Everything that was necessary was in Adam, but was taken out of Adam. So anyway. Yeah, woman is the fall guy. It's all Eve's fault. This was the Renaissance tradition. Women have been blamed forever for this. Milton doesn't think so. And you saw that portrait of him. He looks as sour as he can be, and I'm telling you, the man had a sense of humor. He really did. When Eve is created after Adam asked for this, before Adam sees her, she looks in a pool and she has a reflection of herself. Adam has no pool scene in Paradise Lost, so when he first sees Eve, he says, is this myself I see before me, bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh? He can, you know how it is when you look at yourself, you know, you can't tell if you've ripped the back of your dress. You can see here and like this, but that's all you can see. It's not like when he looks at Eve. Before the Creator grants Adam Eve, he says, a nice and subtle happiness I see thou to thyself proposes in the choice of thy associates, Adam, and will taste no pleasure, though in pleasure solitary. The Creator has given Adam free will. He has the opportunity to choose, you know. And if you know, like the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, you have chosen wisely, you know, you have chosen poorly. According to Milton, Adam really chose poorly. Subtle is one of the primary terms that are used to describe Satan in Paradise Lost. So this notion of subtlety is not a positive construct at all in these characters. Okay, but you know, the Creator says, yeah, okay, yeah, and this is what you asked for it, you got it, you know, have a nice day. So that's basically what happens, and we watch what Milton considers the education of Adam. Milton says, the fall of man was a good thing. He calls it the fortunate fall because, he says, as he describes it in Paradise Lost, Adam and Eve have Eden. They wake up in the morning, they trim back all the plants and all that kind of stuff. They go into the bower. They get up in the morning, yeah, the whole place has grown back, right? They go around, they trim the trees, they go to sleep, they get up in the morning, they trim the leaves, he says, where are they going? They're going nowhere. You know, he says they never could have progressed if they stayed in the garden. He said it was necessary that they fall to rise. So the concept of falling to rise is also central to Paradise Lost. Another thing that Milton does, is to have the scene when Eve is tempted and falls to the serpent. The serpent uses logic to convince Eve. They're forbidden to taste of the tree of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, right? The fruit of the tree of the the serpent convinces Eve, and he's beautiful in Paradise Lost. You know, he can stand up and the animals can still speak, and she's just absolutely mesmerized. And he says, you can make your Creator really proud if you just take some initiative. This is where he wants you to be, so think how pleased he'll be if you just take this step and take this fruit and get this knowledge, and he'll say, well done. You know, she falls for it, literally falls for it. So, of course, as soon as she buys into the apple, she knows. And so she goes to Adam, and she said, the serpent seduced me, and I did eat. That's what she said. So, Adam says, sucks for you, pretty much. Basically, he said, do you think I'm giving this up because you're stupid? This is not going to happen, But then he thinks about it some more, and he said, you know, when I was alone, I didn't like being alone, and I asked the Creator to make me a mate. So Eve is tricked. She is seduced. She falls because she misunderstands and because she's trying to do the right thing. In Paradise Lost, Adam knows exactly what he's doing when he bites the apple. Okay, so it's, again, a different kind of tradition that Milton is kind of working with here. Next. So overall, Paradise Lost is the education of Adam, what he has to learn, what he has to learn to do so that he can complete this great experiment and go forward.